Welcome back to the Chasing Happiness podcast, an honest podcast about finding happiness, what it really means, and the process of getting there. My name is Crystal, and today we're going to be talking to author Rebecca Winn. Rebecca is a multiple award-winning landscape designer, a sage teacher of how we can find beauty when things in our lives fall apart, and of course, an author of a new book called 100 Daffodils. Thank you very much for joining me today, Rebecca. Do you want to just introduce yourself really quickly to everybody who's listening to the podcast?
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Rebecca Winn. I have a recently released book called 100 Daffodils. And the subtitle is Finding Beauty, Grace, and Meaning When Things Fall Apart. So that turned out to be timely.
And absolutely. I think that was one of the things that resonated about the book with me is as I started to read it, because we're in the middle of this COVID-19, because so many different things are going on in the world that are hugely impactful to so many people, it was almost like perfect timing to have the book fall into my universe.
Yeah, and I hope that other people feel that way too. It was not perfect timing for me or my book.
Sure.
Simply because I had this whole huge, coast to coast book tour and all that kind of stuff that just, because literally, you can't make this stuff up. I live in Dallas, and Dallas went on lockdown at midnight on March 23rd. And my book came out 1 minute later on March 24th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The timing is so darkly poetic. It's just, if they were writing a movie, they would say, yeah, no, that's not believable.
Right. People would not believe it if we told them. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. So how since we are talking about that, obviously you've had to cancel the book tour. Most of your interviews have happened just like this one over Skype digitally. How has that changed the experience of being an author for you?
Enormously, really, because first of all, I had some really big and exciting and amazing events scheduled, and I have some new ones scheduled now. But that sort of moment of release of a book, and it's my first book, and it was a very magical thing from the beginning. It was published by a Big Five publisher. It was kind of bigger than the dream, and so I had everybody that knew me, was super excited about it because it was just like this huge thing. I've literally described it as the biggest thing that has ever happened to me next to the birth of my son and the death of my mother. And certainly by far and away the biggest thing that's ever happened to me professionally. And I've done some pretty amazing things professionally, but nothing like this. This was just, it seemed so impossible. It's like being drafted for the NBA or, an Olympic team or something. And so all those parties and all the book signings and the meeting the people and just the celebration around all of that and everybody that was so happy for me and losing all of that was really big. And everybody who was not published at the peak of a pandemic has said that those moments when you really get to look your readers in the eye and they say, wow, your book has changed my life, that is just the most fulfilling and validating thing that can possibly happen to you as an author. And, so I've gotten emails to that effect. But it's not the same as getting to look people in the eye and hug them and,
sure.
Really connect with them on a very personal level, which is how I operate in the world. And so losing that is a lot. And I didn't even get to, my family all live in Los Angeles and everybody was flying in for all the big parties. Not that I have a big family. I have a teeny, tiny little family, but they were all coming. And my son when everything, when the dominoes started to fall and it was clear that there was going to be no travel, and, my son said, well, I at least want to come because I don't want you to be alone on this incredibly important day. But I said, honey, he lived in Los Angeles, which was one of the original hotbeds.
Right.
And I said, and then he was going to fly here. And I said, if you happen to be one of these asymptomatic carriers, or you caught something on the plane and you brought it to me and something happened to me, you would never forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Like that. I just couldn't put him in the position of doing that, as much as I wanted him to come and did not want to be alone on the launch day of my book. And so, the whole book, as you know, is my process of rising up above the experience that I'm in and finding the greater meaning, whether it's sort of a universal theme or the greater meaning for me in my life. Really been trying to do that with this. I have not found it yet, but I am absolutely confident that it's there. I am sure that there is some profound soul lesson that I will find in this experience, because I'm looking for it.
Right.
I think that really and truly one of the ways in which transformation happens is not just when we're open to it, but when we're actively seeking it. Sometimes it just happens to us. Bam! What you gonna do with that?
Right.
But a lot of times, at some level, we seek it, and I need an explanation for this. So I'm looking for it.
It will come eventually.
That is my hope.
Which actually leads into one of my questions. You talk in the book about learning to sort of let go of all of the things you can't control, even though you try to control them all. So this is, again, one of those life experiences where, sure, there are aspects we can control, like leaving our house or not leaving our house, wearing a mask, those sorts of things. But we literally have no control over this pandemic and how it's impacted the world. Based on what I've read from the book, are you finding it easier to sort of deal with that aspect of the world we're living in right now?
I think I am. Now, I would like to add a caveat to that letting go is not something that I would say I have mastery of yet, at all. That is certainly one of my biggest and most challenging lessons in this life. But that being said, I have a friend who created sort of an outdoor theater in her backyard.
Oh, wow.
For the summer. Yeah, she got a huge 9 by 6 foot screen and these huge speakers, and she has, chairs set up 10 feet apart and fans circulating the air. I mean, it's super, super, super conscious, socially distanced, but a way of sharing time together and movie nights. And I was over there because we're doing the Lord of the Rings trilogy right now, but the extended edition.
Wow.
So it's 2 nights to do each movie. And she said to me when I was over there last week, she said, I know you may feel like you are not handling this very well, because I do get super sad sometimes. I mean, it's been a real emotional roller coaster for me. Sometimes I'm pretty zen about it, and sometimes I'm just heartbroken, And so she said, you may feel like you're not really handling this very well, but she said most people would be flattened by this. And she was just talking about the specific impact that it was having on this enormous dream of mine that is, being realized.
Sure.
And so that kind of made me feel good because, I think I even say somewhere in the book, we can't see our own transformation, but those who are around us do see it. And I appreciated her saying that because it has been hard. And yet, at the same time, I do not find myself constantly trying to micromanage making things, trying to fit them back into the box where I had them in terms of my expectations. I really have sort of relaxed into the reality of this situation. And I've always been felt very resonant with this African proverb, pray and move your feet. And so I'm not resisting it. I'm not struggling against it. I'm not sinking into a sense of victimhood or anything like that. I do get sad, and I just acknowledge that. And then, I see what I can do. And so I feel okay about it. The feedback about the book has been really, really, really amazing. And it hasn't fallen into 250,000 hands yet, but that's still my prayer.
The book, I think, has so many different lessons for people, especially for those of us who are listening to this podcast, who are trying to take this sort of transformational journey ourselves. Because in anyone's life, it doesn't matter if you have kids, if you're married, at some point there's a story that resonates throughout this book with you. There is something that you connect with. And you and I talked briefly a little while ago before we started the podcast about how I was hooked on your book in the very beginning, even just in the prologue, because you have the prologue start off with you in your garden, which is a central theme to the book, in your garden looking at this spider web that disappears the closer you get, but the further away you are from it at a certain angle, you can kind of see it. And that just spoke to me on such a visceral level that I knew this book was going to have meaning and purpose in my life. So thank you for that story to start the book off at. I think it also is a great reminder of what you've just been talking about. We don't see ourselves grow and change because we're in the middle of it. And we need those people around us to help us take that step back and be able to say, hey, think about where you were 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. That's not who you are anymore. And it's so important for all of us to have that. There's a part in the book where you actually talk sort of similarly about a friend that you had who you had, I think it's closer to the beginning of the book. You had her in your life for a very long time. And at some point you just decided she was too much of a negative energy and a competitor with you. So you cut her out a little bit. And when you did...
Not a bit, completely.
And when you did, people in your life said to you, like, where is she? What happened? And one friend said to you, well, we could never figure out why you were friends with her to begin with. And I thought, this is literally everyone's life. We have at some point or another had this person who at the time we didn't know they were filling this other role for us. But we kept them and they sucked our energy, or they never made us feel good about who we were, but we weren't willing to let them go until we had that aha kind of moment, like Oprah calls it.
Yeah, and I think that the next line, after we never could understand why you were friends with her, is actually critical. Because the next line is, because she was always so mean to you. Whoa, because I didn't see that. I mean, I could see the really glaring examples, but apparently it was happening all the time and everybody could see it except me. That was one of my very earliest experiences of setting a hard boundary. It wasn't like I embodied that power at that time. Like I did it that one time, and then it took me 15 years to ever do it again, or 20. But yeah, I do think everybody has people in their lives that are, there's all this vocabulary around now about what are those people. They're energy vampires, they're negative influences, they're toxic, they're, all this. But you know what? That's not how I like to frame things in my life. I call them teachers, because if we let them be, if we don't just write them off as bad and toxic, if we actually look at the nature of the relationship that we had with them and then dive into, forget what they were doing, forget what they were saying, forget how they were treating you. That is not the point. The point is, why were you there? Like that Reverend
Beverly, I think, was who you were talking.
Yeah. Reverend Literally, my very first therapist. Yeah. Yeah. So I said, for those who haven't read the book, I just offloaded, all of these reasons why I had just divorced my best friend. This was in the very first session with her. And I said, I guess I just need permission to do this. I need somebody to tell me it's okay for me to do this. And she said, okay, it's okay for you to do this. Now, let's talk about why it's taken you 11 years to do it. And I was like, wait a minute. I want to talk about how bad she was. I don't want to,
Right.
I had no idea what therapy was going to look like at that time. I didn't know anybody that had ever been in therapy. I was young, and so that was amazing, because just that one question from that one therapist, 30 years ago, has informed my whole journey ever since. Now, let's talk about why you were there, Where's the gift in this person, and obviously the worse they treated you, the harder that is, right?
Throughout the journey that you take in the book, continue to try to allow yourself to figure out what this whole, not just loving yourself theory of life is, but loving life and the people who cross your path in whatever way they're meant to cross your path, even in the midst of your sort of confusion and anger and everything else you were going through. I remember there's a part in the book where you talk about, I believe his name was Glenn, meeting Glenn, getting to know Glenn, sort of how being disconnected because he was in Toronto and you were where you were, gave you a little bit of time to get used to what this sort of love thing was, or how people could care about each other based on the life you had been living. And I remember thinking as I was reading that passage, how meaningful to be able to take the time in life to say, I literally don't know who I am, but this other person is going to love me anyway and care about me and my feelings and what I need. It almost seems mind-blowing.
I know, right? It's true. It's magical.
Yes, absolutely. And for someone, especially when it's someone you've never met, I think part of the reason it resonated so hard with me is because of what we're living through right now with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, with everything else that's going on in the world. And it was this moment of, there really are people in the world who, regardless of who you are, where you're from, they're going to try to love you for who you are in this moment without trying to change you or make you into what they need you to be. They're just going to be present.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That moment where we were on the phone and I was spinning out about something and he was kind of quiet and I was just looking for a target. I wasn't mad at him. I was mad about something else.
Right.
And I said, what's the matter? Why are you being so quiet? Why aren't you saying anything? I'm sorry. I was really trying to get and send you energy so I could help ground you. And I was like, you mean people actually talk like that and treat each other that way and feel that way and think like that? Like, it was just so out of my experience, sort of at large. I was like, are you real?
It's hard, I think, especially for those of us that have lived through some sort of trauma that involves somebody who we thought loved us or that we loved, only to discover what we thought was love really isn't love. This other thing is. And it, like you said before, it can be hard to have that mirror sort of right in front of your face, and you have to analyze exactly where that disconnect was and how you move past it. So having those moments, having those people just reinforces you're on the right journey and you will get to that point that you're hoping to find someday. And it's hard.
Yes.
Especially, I think, for people who, what I hear a lot from people who listen to this podcast or follow me online is, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you stop living this one life and start to live another. And you do a really good job in the book of helping people to see through the stories that you tell that it's not that you wake up one morning and things are different because you decided they were. It's that you take one step, one day, and eventually you look back and 500 steps have happened.
That's right. That's right. It's that that sort of driving on the dark, unlit highway at night, and your headlights only show you the next 20 feet, but when you get there, it's the next 20 feet and the next 20 feet and the next 20 feet all the way. And I think that one of, you haven't asked me for advice, but I'm just going to say that I think one of the ways that I did that, and I did it intuitively, so I'm not going to take credit for this being conscious, but I think that it can be a conscious decision, which is to just set an intention. If you meditate, which I highly recommend, or pray, or, any way in which you connect with a higher power, whatever you perceive that to be, or even if you perceive that to be, nothing, but you can look outside and look at nature and know that there is something that impels life, something that you can connect with that is bigger than you, even if it's standing on a mountaintop and looking out at the vista, or if it's at the bottom of a mountain and looking up at this majestic and beautiful thing that supports all kinds of life when you start dialing into it. But something that you can connect to that is bigger than your little bitty life, that feels really big to you, and it is big to you, but it is small in the big scheme of things. So connecting with something bigger than you, because also there's an enormous relief to that too, right? When you just shift your perspective in a way that all of a sudden you realize the relative scale of what you're experiencing. But anyway, so you do that, however you do that, and then set an intention, hopefully on a daily basis, to be open and for guidance. And, even that, I am open, I am guided. That can be your whole entire prayer, your whole entire mantra during meditation. I am open, I am guided. Because what that does is it puts you in this place of trust, and that there's guidance there to be had, and that you are willing for something to shift, right? So there's a big difference between being dissatisfied with where you are now and actually being willing for something to change. Because as much as we dislike where we are in the moment with whatever, your job or your relationship or, whatever, where you live or what kind of car you drive or whatever it is, if there's any aspect of your life with which you are not fully and completely thrilled and satisfied, I'd like to meet you. But if there's something that you want to change, you really, really, really need to ask yourself, am I actually willing for it to change? Because there's something strangely comfortable about what we know, and there's something terrifying about what we don't know. And so to say change is hard is kind of a cliche, right? On the one hand, people say, I want XYZ to change. And then we know this cliche that change is hard, and yet you have to make that personal. Not just the cliche change is hard, but are you actually willing to experience something different in your life? And if you are, what do you want that to look like? And how can you set an intention around that? And if you don't know yet, then I am open, I am guided is the perfect place to start. I can remember, and this was literally decades ago, like 25 years ago, when I very first started really wanting to expand my consciousness. But I had no idea what I wanted that to look like. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to be different, or even if there was anything I wanted to be different. I just wanted a more expanded consciousness. So I started meditating, but I envisioned myself in nature, of course, and it started in this beautiful meadow with sort of tall, waving green grass and wildflowers. And then I went up this small mountain. It wasn't a hike. It was a walk up a small elevated place. And I turned around when I got to the top. All of this is just in my, visualization, right? And looked out over this vista, the world, which I could see in my meditation far further than I could actually see in real life if I were on any mountaintop. But I just thought, well, I don't really have anything to ask for right now. So I just envisioned this light emanating from my chest out to the world. I thought, well, I don't really know what I want, but I bet somebody out there does. So here, I just want to share my light. I'm just giving my light out to the world, just throwing my light out to the world. And I did that for a long time. And this was way before like that Paying It Forward movie or,
Sure.
The Expression or anything like that. It was just like this intuitive sense that I don't know what I want. So I'm just opening myself and giving my light to the world. And maybe that will be returned to me. I wasn't even thinking about that. That was my first step in the I am open, I am guided sort of process.
I think that's a great instruction for people, because what I hear from people a lot is, Rebecca, just because I don't know if you know anything about me or not, but I basically woke up one morning unhappy, sold 80% of everything I owned, and moved across my country to start my journey. And most people who contact me because they follow me online or they listen to this podcast, they say, I have a husband, I have a house, I have kids. I can't sell everything I own and move across the country. And my answer to them is always, you don't have to. Everybody's journey looks different. Everybody does this in a way that's meaningful for them, and how I did it is not going to be meaningful for you. So you have to figure out what it is for you that is going to make sense. And I think what you just gave people is something, no matter who you are or where you are, you can start right there.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That, I did not know that about you. That's fascinating. So you lived where?
So Southern Ontario, born and raised in Southern Ontario up here in Canada. And I dropped out of high school as a teenager really quickly. I'll give you a little background. Dropped out of high school as a teenager in my mid-20s, went to college, studied addictions, counseling, and therapy, and then went to university, got a degree in psychology. And when I left, started a business that had nothing to do with psychology, because I found out in my last year of my program that I couldn't do what I wanted to do with my psychology degree, because in Canada, things work a little different, and that's just not something that happens here. So my bubble got burst, so to speak, and I didn't know what I wanted out of life. So I started this little tiny business out of my home and woke up one morning just totally fed up with it. I wasn't happy with where my life was. I wasn't the person who needed the white picket fence and the kids and the husband, and I didn't know what that meant in the world that I lived in. So an opportunity presented itself for me to move out west, and I did. And my parents just about had a heart attack, but understood that I have never been one to be put in a box. So Chasing Happiness basically started as a blog for me to have them follow wherever I ended up in the world and whatever was happening. So that's kind of where my journey started, but it's a drastic way to start a journey for most people. So I always tell people, like, you've got to find your footing where you are. You've got to start where you are, because not everybody can blow up their whole life. And so I think what you've just given people is a way for them to do that. And it's such a beautiful way to do it, even if you don't know what the change is that you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, that was absolutely me. I didn't know. And it took a while for that to reveal itself to me, but I was open and I was guided, and then it began to unfold. I mean, it unfolded in kind of a rocky way, but in many ways, I was spiritually prepared. I might not have been physically prepared or emotionally prepared, but I was spiritually prepared. And that actually is the most important thing, I think.
The whole book is actually full of moments like that, and that's why I'm so glad that I got exposed to it, and I'm so happy that I can share it here on the podcast with everyone. If people don't know where to find the book, it is 100 Daffodils, and it is available everywhere. And
there's a beautiful, beautiful cover. I love my cover. I love the spine.
It is a gorgeous book, and it is written so beautifully in a way that if you're someone who contacts me on a regular basis for this podcast and says, I can't read the way you read, you've divided it up into these little tiny sections that people could spend, 5 or 10 minutes a day just reading before they go to bed. And each section has such a powerful message attached to it that by the time you're done, I think regardless of what life you're living, you've had an emotional journey along with Rebecca. So thank you for sharing it with all of us. Before I let you...
I also want to say that it's also available in audio.
Awesome.
For people who would like to just listen to it on a walk or whatever.
Which is perfect, because let's face it, Right now, a lot of us are still self-isolating in our homes and not able to do a whole lot, but go out for exercise on a daily basis or whatever. So a great way to consume the book if you're looking to do so. Before I let you go, is there anything, whether it's advice or just knowledge, that you want to share with everybody who's listening to the podcast?
Oh, we got a whole other hour. No, I think I would just say, the takeaway is really going back to that: be open, and I'm guided. I'm open, I'm guided. I really do think that those two steps are the most important things that you can do to get started. And just let everything else go. You're not going to solve all of your problems, in the moment that you decide you want to transform your life, or you want to change your job, or what, you want out of your marriage. I mean, any major step or change that you make is going to take time. So just allow that, and just be open and allow guidance. Guidance is there. I really think our higher consciousness is so willing, ready, and able to help us if we will just ask and then listen for the answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me on the podcast, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you. You too.
Thank you again, Rebecca, for joining me, and thank you to all of you guys for tuning in. I know this podcast was longer than our typical podcast, so I appreciate that you stayed until the end. In the show notes, I am going to put links to the book for those of you that are interested, and I appreciate all of you. So if you guys enjoy the podcast and you think you know somebody who might like the book or enjoy this podcast, please feel free to share it. Have a great week, guys, and I will chat with you next week. Bye for now.